Well, most doctors who work in actual hospitals and medical institutions have to show up to the office. We know that employees are more productive and more efficient when they are working in an in-office environment.
All right, let's break down what just went down on live television. Because honestly, this might be one of the biggest media slip-ups we've seen all year. Michael Strahan, former NFL star turned Good Morning America host, walked in like he was about to score a political touchdown. He came prepared, had his angles lined up, cue the dramatic setup, and went head-to-head with Karoline Leavitt, who is known for being sharp and quick on her feet. But here's the twist, it didn't go the way he expected. Strahan may have taken down quarterbacks back in his football days, but in this exchange he got completely outplayed. He was dodging, stumbling, and struggling to keep control of the conversation. Karoline didn't just handle the pressure, she turned it around. She took the moment, flipped it in her favor, and suddenly Strahan looked like he was in over his head. And the wild part, she stayed calm the whole time. So what actually happened? How did what was supposed to be a gotcha moment end up backfiring so badly? Let's break it down. It all started with a question Strahan likely thought would put her on the spot. He brought up Donald Trump's plan to cut down the federal workforce by offering a large buyout to around 2 million government employees.
We want to start with the administration's offer to buy with a mass buyout to federal employees out there. How many do you hope will take it, and by what percentage does the president want to downsize the federal workforce?
Now, if you're coming at this like a typical mainstream media host, you'd assume this makes the administration look cold and out of touch. The expectation, headlines calling it anti-worker, maybe even authoritarian, something designed to sound alarming. But Karoline was ready for that. She didn't hesitate. She didn't backtrack. She leaned in and made it clear. This wasn't some mass firing plan. It was a voluntary buyout. That's the key word, voluntary, and honestly, pretty generous. Anyone who wanted to leave could take up to 8 months of paid leave and then move on. No pink slips, no one being pushed out. Just a choice, and a well-paid one at that. And her reasoning? She pointed out that only about 6% of federal employees in Washington, D.C. are even showing up to the office.
This is another promise made and kept by President Trump. He told the American people on the campaign trail that he was going to make our federal government more efficient and productive. And it is a fact that only 6% of the federal workforce here in Washington, D.C.
Let that really sink in for a second. You're paying for the lights, the heating, the upkeep, those massive federal buildings downtown. And meanwhile, most of the workforce is logging in from home. Sitting on the couch, coffee in hand, still in pajamas, treating a quick morning Zoom like it checks the box for public service. Karoline didn't sugarcoat it. She said it straight. In her view, it's taxpayer money being wasted. And Strahan? He didn't seem to have a clear response. She brought the focus back to everyday Americans. The teachers, the police officers, and the nurses, people who show up in person every single day. They don't have the option to do their jobs from a laptop at home. They're not getting paid to stay off-site. So her question was simple. Why should federal workers be any different?
Completely unacceptable. Middle-class Americans, our teachers, our nurses, our law enforcement officers who keep this economy working show up to the office every single day, and President Trump expects that federal employees do the same.
Now, here's where Strahan tried to recover. You could almost see him searching for something that would turn things around. He jumped in with, okay, but what about doctors and scientists? Like that was going to corner her. But let's be real, doctors working from home? Karoline didn't hesitate for a second. She said what most people were already thinking. You can't properly diagnose someone over FaceTime. You can't run lab experiments from your kitchen. That's not real science. It sounds more like something out of a sitcom. Her response landed hard, but it was grounded in reality. This wasn't about being harsh. It was about expectations. The message was simple. If you're being paid with taxpayer money, then you should be showing up and doing the job properly. Pretty straightforward, right?
So his order, as presented in that memo last night, directs federal agencies to come up with a return-to-work policy for their agencies. And if federal bureaucrats in this city don't like that, well, guess what? They can resign from their positions, and this administration is offering them 8 months of pay. They will be paid through September just to simply resign from their positions. If 5 to 10% of the federal workforce resigns, it will save taxpayers tens of billions of dollars. And so, look, we want people to return to work. We have beautiful federal office buildings here in Washington, D.C. that American taxpayers are paying for. They should be used. That's what the American people deserve.
And Justice Strahan was still trying to shake that off. He went for one last Hail Mary. He shifted gears and brought up federal assistance programs, suggesting the administration was taking support away from vulnerable communities, the people who need it most. It was a classic emotional angle, a "how could you do this" moment, meant to put her on the defensive.
Let's get to the funding part. The White House putting a freeze on federal assistance program. The federal judges put the freeze temporarily on hold, saying the government itself doesn't have the full scope of the programs that are going to be impacted. So what's your response to that?
But Karoline didn't let that narrative stick for even a second. She pushed back hard and made her point clear. This wasn't some reckless wave of budget cuts. It was a review, a temporary strategic pause meant to take a closer look at where the money is actually going. And at the center of it was one simple question: is any of the spending really making a difference?
This is a temporary pause on federal assistance and grants so that the Office of Management and Budget here in the Executive Office of the President can review all federal assistance that is going out the door.
Because here's the key point. This wasn't about taking away support from people who need it. Karoline made that distinction very clear. Essential programs like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and SNAP benefits were not being touched. They continued as normal. What was being questioned instead were the areas seen as inefficient or wasteful spending, the parts of the system that don't always deliver clear results.
And as I repeatedly stated yesterday, individual assistance such as Medicare payments, Social Security benefits, welfare, food stamps, and Medicaid assistance will not be impacted by this federal pause. So the American people should not worry. If they're receiving individual assistance from the federal government, they will continue to receive that.
Like seriously, take this in. There was even a government-funded study about shrimp running on treadmills. No, that's not a joke. That's something taxpayer money actually went toward. Karoline broke it down like she was reading off a frustrating final bill at a restaurant. Her point was simple. Why keep pouring money into programs that aren't even aligned with the current administration's direction? She referenced things like certain DEI training initiatives and Green New Deal-related projects, arguing that if policies have already been rolled back or paused, continuing to fund them doesn't make much sense. In her view, it's not about cutting for the sake of cutting. It's about stopping spending that no longer serves a purpose. And Strahan, at that point, he looked like he was just trying to wrap things up.
And what we cannot do is fund programs that run contrary to the executive orders and actions that this president has already taken. So there will be no more federal funding for DEI programs. There will be no more federal funding for the Green New Deal, which is an order from the previous administration that President Trump has rescinded. It would make no sense for American taxpayers to pay for policies that this administration is no longer implementing.
The man looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. But it didn't stop there. He went for one last attempt, bringing up a reported hiccup in the Medicaid portal during the rollout of the freeze. In his mind, this was the opening he needed, a technical issue he could frame as chaos, disruption, or maybe even panic. Except,
Medicaid system was disrupted across the country yesterday. Online portals, they went down in response to this freeze action. So should that not have happened? And is that a sign of a chaotic rollout?
The portal issue? It was quickly fixed, within minutes. Karoline addressed it directly. No dodging, no confusion, no hesitation. Yes, they were aware of the glitch. Yes, it was corrected fast. And the system, as she explained, was already back up and functioning normally, arguably even more smoothly than before. In the end, what was meant to be a major gotcha moment didn't really land. Instead, it just exposed how shaky the argument was in the first place.
No, absolutely not. And I would like to address that. We were made aware of that immediately, and we amended the problem immediately. The Medicaid program is back up and running online.
And as she explained calmly, spreading misinformation only fuels unnecessary panic. Strahan just sat there with an awkward smile, barely nodding along. At that point, his whole line of questioning was starting to fall apart, piece by piece. It felt less like a sharp exchange and more like someone trying to keep up in a debate they weren't fully prepared for. And just when it seemed like it was finally winding down, nope, Strahan made one more attempt, this time bringing up the Kennedy angle. He referenced Caroline Kennedy's public criticism of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. including her comments calling him dangerous and misinformed, tying it to his nomination as Secretary of Health and Human Services under Donald Trump.
Okay, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., let's go to another topic. We have a lot to cover here. President Trump's nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services has his confirmation hearing this morning, where his cousin, Karoline Kennedy, she's speaking out against him, calling him, quote, unqualified with dangerous and willfully misinformed views on vaccines, and that he is a predator. And what's your response to that?
Karoline's response? A complete mic drop. She didn't just push back on the criticism, she reframed the entire argument. She pointed to RFK Jr.'s long track record in public health work, environmental advocacy, and pushing for greater transparency in scientific and regulatory institutions. Her point was that he wasn't some random outsider with no background. He had legal wins, published work, and a history of challenging powerful systems when he believed something was wrong.
I would reject those comments fiercely. RFK Jr. is widely respected. He's a great man who has dedicated his life to public service and to research. He is pro-science, and he is committed to making this country healthy again. He campaigned alongside President Trump, and they spoke that motto to tens of millions of Americans across the country who clearly believed in it. America is one of the richest yet unhealthiest countries in the world.
She said what a lot of Americans are already thinking. This is one of the richest countries in the world, yet also one of the unhealthiest. And her point was simple. If someone is willing to ask uncomfortable questions about that, then those concerns should at least be heard, not ignored. She also made a clear distinction. Disagreeing with RFK Jr. is one thing, but labeling him as dangerous just for challenging established systems, in her view, crosses a line from journalism into something else entirely. And Karoline wasn't backing down from that position. At that point, Strahan didn't really have another angle left to work with. He came in expecting a viral moment. What he ended up with was a very different outcome. A controlled, steady response that kept the focus on facts, not theatrics.
If you look at our obesity rates, our autism rates, we should be performing far better. Our people should be much healthier. And that's all that RFK Jr. is trying to do. And so President Trump stands strongly behind him, and we look forward to watching him shine on Capitol Hill today in his confirmation hearing, just like all of the other nominees that President Trump has appointed to their respective agencies and departments.
And the internet definitely noticed. So, what's the real takeaway here? For many viewers, the moment wasn't just about one interview, it was about how these exchanges usually go and when they don't go as expected. Karoline Leavitt came across as steady and prepared, sticking to her points without getting pulled into theatrics or pressure tactics. Her approach wasn't about drama or sound bites, it was about staying consistent, answering directly, and pushing back when she felt the framing was off. And that's why people are talking about it. Supporters say she represents a more direct, no-nonsense style of communication that doesn't get easily rattled in interviews. Critics see it differently, of course. But the contrast is what made the moment stand out. In the end, Michael Strahan came in aiming for a headline moment. What unfolded instead was a back and forth that sparked a much bigger online reaction than expected. If anything, it shows how quickly these live exchanges can shift when both sides come prepared and unwilling to fold under pressure.